March 20th, 2003, Baghdad. The night was too quiet for a city on the edge of history. Then, without warning, the sky cracked open. Flames painted the heavens, sirens screamed, and the world watched as America launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. Reporters said it was justice. Politicians called it liberation. But in the silence between explosions, truth whispered something else. Because what if the war that promised peace was never about peace at all? What if it was built on a lie so massive, the entire world believed it? For months, global leaders stood before cameras with shaking papers and bold words. Weapons of mass destruction. They said Iraq was dangerous. They said Saddam Hussein had the power to end civilizations. But what they never said was that the evidence was empty, the motive darker, and the goal far more profitable. Behind closed doors, long before the bombs fell, oil maps were drawn. Meetings were held. Contracts prepared. And in the corridors of power, the fate of millions was reduced to numbers, resources, and control. In living rooms across the world, people watched the invasion on glowing screens, explosions broadcast like fireworks, narrated as if justice had arrived. But for the people of Iraq, those lights weren't liberation. They were the end of normal life. Children cried under shattered roofs. Ancient streets, once full of stories, became rivers of fire. The war that promised democracy delivered destruction. Weeks turned to months. Baghdad fell. Saddam was gone. And the world cheered, believing evil had been defeated. But when investigators entered the ruins, there was nothing. No chemical weapons. No nuclear programs. Nothing but dust, bodies, and disbelief. The lie had worked. And when truth finally surfaced, the cameras had already moved on. But someone had to ask, if there were no weapons, then why was there war? Documents leaked years later painted a chilling picture. Oil companies connected to government officials receiving massive contracts, secret deals written before the invasion even began. Billions made, millions lost. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a truth no one dared to speak. The Iraq War wasn't about defense. It was about dominance. The Middle East wasn't just a region, it was a chessboard. And Iraq? The piece that had to fall so the next move could be played. As the smoke cleared, Iraq was left broken, its cities torn apart, its people scattered, its identity stolen. What followed wasn't peace, but chaos, civil wars, insurgencies, and a generation raised in fear. The ugliest truth wasn't the destruction. It was how easily the world was convinced it was necessary. Because fear is the most powerful weapon. It doesn't need bullets. It only needs belief. Years later, when the documents came out, the apologies never did. The masterminds moved on, the prophets cashed, the speeches forgotten. But for the people who lived through it, the truth could never be buried again. The Iraq War wasn't a tragedy of war. It was a tragedy of deception. Because when lies wear the mask of patriotism, even truth becomes treason. And in that silence between bombs and headlines, one question still echoes. If the war was built on lies, what else have we been told to believe? Studio Microphone: the ugly truth of the Iraq War, lies, oil, and power. Because history isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes, it's written by the profiteers.